You're in a meeting. You present an idea you've been building for days. You explain it clearly, confidently. For a brief moment, the room is silent. Then someone says, "I'm not sure that makes sense." It's not aggressive. It's not humiliating. But something tightens inside you. Before you think, you respond. You clarify. You reinforce your reasoning. You add context. Your tone sharpens slightly. Not enough for others to notice, enough for you to feel it. Later that night, the moment replays. You tell yourself you were just defending your idea, that you care about quality, that you don't like being misunderstood. But beneath that explanation, a quieter question waits. Why did it feel personal? Because sometimes what you defend isn't your opinion. It's your identity. No one remembers the exact moment they began constructing it. It happened gradually. A teacher questioned your ability. A parent compared you to someone more disciplined. A friend dismissed something you loved. Small events, ordinary moments, but powerful enough to teach you something subtle. Certain versions of you are rewarded, others are not. So you adapted. Maybe you decided you would never be seen as incompetent again, so you became prepared, sharp, capable. Maybe you decided you would never be perceived as weak, so you became independent, composed, self-contained. Maybe you decided you would never be ignored, so you became impressive, productive, distinct. At first, the adjustment helped you. It earned approval. It created stability. But over time, adaptation became identity. The role stopped being something you used. It became something you protected. And once identity becomes something you protect, contradiction feels dangerous. If someone questions your competence, it threatens the capable one. If someone challenges your strength, it destabilizes the strong one. If someone points out inconsistency, it cracks the rational one. The reaction is rarely about the present moment. It is about preserving the structure. Defensiveness is not always arrogance. It is often fear. Fear that without the role, you may not know who you are. And here is the uncomfortable possibility. The parts of you that react most intensely may not be your essence. They may be your armor. Armor protects something vulnerable. But if you forget you're wearing it, you begin to believe it's your skin. Then every disagreement feels like attack. Every criticism feels like threat. And every crack feels like collapse. But truth does not panic. Only fragile structures do. So the real question is this. If you feel compelled to defend certain parts of yourself so quickly, what exactly are you protecting? And who would you be if you didn't have to protect that image at all? That is where we begin. You didn't consciously decide who to become. The role formed quietly. Maybe you were praised for being intelligent. You answered quickly in class, and people noticed. Approval followed performance. Intelligence became more than a trait. It became security. Or maybe you were admired for being calm. While others reacted emotionally, you stayed composed. Adults called you mature. Stability became value. For some, it was kindness. Being agreeable avoided conflict. Being helpful prevented rejection. You learned that if you were easy to love, you would not be abandoned. Each time the world rewarded a trait, your mind registered it. This works. And what works gets repeated. Repetition becomes expectation. Expectation becomes identity. You were no longer someone who performed well. You were the capable one. No longer someone who stayed calm. You were the strong one. No longer someone who avoided conflict. You were the good one. And once a trait becomes identity, deviation feels risky. If you are the capable one, mistakes feel threatening. If you are the strong one, vulnerability feels dangerous. If you are the good one, anger feels unacceptable.
The role that once empowered you begins to limit you, not because it is false, but because it is incomplete. Identity narrows through selection. You emphasize what is rewarded and silence what is not. The confused parts retreat. The insecure parts retreat. The contradictory parts retreat. At first, this feels like growth, like refinement, like maturity. But refinement built on exclusion creates fragility. The more your worth depends on one dimension, the more defensive you become when that dimension is questioned. Criticism stops being information. It becomes threat, because the role was never just personality. It was protection. At some point, you made a silent agreement with the world. If I am this, I will be safe. But you are no longer the person who needed that agreement. The role may have helped you survive. The question now is whether it still defines you, or whether you are defending something you no longer need to be.
Once the role becomes identity, a defense system forms around it. You don't activate it consciously, it activates itself. Someone questions your decision, and explanation appears immediately. Someone points out a flaw, and justification follows. Someone disagrees, and your body reacts before reflection begins. This speed matters. Defense is fast because it protects structure. If your identity depends on being competent, moral, intelligent, or strong, then contradiction feels destabilizing, and destabilization feels unsafe. So the mind works to restore coherence. It gathers arguments, reframes the situation, minimizes opposing views, highlights evidence that confirms your self-image. Not because you are incapable of growth, but because the system prefers stability over uncertainty. The ego's primary task is consistency. It wants the story of who you are to remain intact. When new information challenges that story, tension appears. Defense reduces that tension quickly. Integration takes longer. Integration requires admitting, maybe I don't see the full picture. If you identify as rational, emotional reactions feel threatening. You explain them away. If you identify as kind, resentment feels unacceptable. You suppress it. If you identify as independent, needing help feels humiliating. You deny it. Defense is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like humor, sometimes like overconfidence, sometimes like silence. But its function is the same. Preserve the role. The more rigid the identity, the more sensitive the system becomes. Small feedback feels large. Minor disagreement feels personal. You stop listening fully. Not because you lack intelligence, but because listening becomes risky. If the other person is right, something in you must reorganize, and reorganization feels like loss. Here is the paradox. The more tightly you defend who you are, the less space you leave to become more. Because growth requires contradiction. It requires discovering blind spots. It requires allowing parts of your self-image to shift. But if your worth depends on the role remaining stable, you will resist that shift, even if consciously you say you want change. Defense keeps identity coherent, but it also keeps it narrow. And a narrow identity demands constant maintenance. The deeper question is no longer whether you defend yourself. It is this: are you protecting truth or protecting a version of yourself you are afraid to outgrow? Defending an identity rarely feels dramatic. Most of the time, it feels like responsibility. You tell yourself you simply care about doing things well, about being consistent, about maintaining standards. And that may be true, but beneath that surface, something subtle is happening. You are monitoring yourself. You replay conversations to check if you sounded competent enough. You rethink responses to see if you appeared confident enough. You analyze tone, posture, pauses. This is not paranoia. It is maintenance. If your identity depends on being the capable one, mistakes feel heavier than they should. If it depends on being the strong one, visible struggle feels dangerous. If it depends on being the agreeable one, conflict feels threatening. So you manage yourself carefully. You soften reactions, hide uncertainty, reinforce strengths. Over time, this creates a quiet tension. Not panic, not collapse, just pressure. Pressure to remain coherent with the role, and coherence requires effort. You hesitate before expressing opinions that don't fully align with your image. You avoid situations where you might look inexperienced. You resist conversations that expose vulnerability. From the outside, you look stable. Internally, you may feel compressed, like you are holding a posture for too long. This compression reduces spontaneity. Spontaneity requires permission to contradict yourself, to experiment, to evolve. Rigid identity does not allow that easily. So you calculate before speaking, edit before expressing, filter before acting. And gradually, you feel slightly disconnected from your immediate experience, less free. Not because you lack ability, but because you lack permission. There is also a relational cost. If others relate primarily to your role, they admire your competence but do not see your confusion. They rely on your strength but do not know your fragility. You can be valued and still feel unseen, because being seen requires revealing what does not fit the image, and revealing that feels risky when your identity depends on stability. Over time, fatigue appears. Not physical fatigue, identity fatigue. You grow tired of maintaining consistency, tired of defending small cracks, tired of rehearsing yourself. The question becomes sharper now. Are you exhausted because life is demanding, or because you are constantly preserving who you appear to be within it? If you became the strong one, what happened to your fear? If you became the intelligent one, what happened to your confusion? If you became the good one, what happened to your anger? Identity works through selection. It amplifies what fits the role and silences what threatens it. Over time, the selected traits feel natural. The rejected ones feel foreign, but they are still yours. You can only suppress parts of yourself for so long before they begin to surface indirectly. The strong one may feel sudden waves of exhaustion they can't explain. The agreeable one may experience quiet resentment. The rational one may have disproportionate emotional reactions. These are not flaws. They are neglected dimensions. When a trait becomes central to identity, its opposite becomes uncomfortable. And what feels uncomfortable internally is often criticized externally. Notice what irritates you intensely in others: arrogance, dependency, emotional volatility, laziness. Sometimes what disturbs you most is not simply the trait itself, but the fact that you have forbidden that trait within yourself. If you define yourself as disciplined, you may harshly judge carelessness. If you define yourself as selfless, you may condemn selfishness. If you define yourself as logical, you may dismiss emotional expression. Projection protects identity. It allows you to reject outside what you refuse to integrate inside. The stronger the persona, the more fragile it becomes when confronted by its opposite. Because if you admit the opposite exists within you, the image cracks. But wholeness is not built on exclusivity. It is built on integration. You are not only strong, you are also fragile. Not only intelligent, also uncertain. Not only kind, also capable of selfishness. When you allow these contradictions consciously, criticism loses intensity. Being wrong does not destroy you. Feeling anger does not redefine you. Needing help does not erase your independence. The more dimensions you accept, the less defensive you become, because nothing essential is at stake. Defending who you're not requires denying complexity, and denying complexity keeps you divided. The question now becomes deeper.
What part of yourself are you still trying to keep hidden? And what would change if you stopped treating it as a threat?
If identity were shaped only in childhood, change would be easier. But adulthood reinforces the role constantly. You are known for something. Competent, reliable, strategic, independent, calm. That reputation follows you, and once others expect consistency, deviation feels risky. At work, your image becomes part of your value. If you are seen as decisive, hesitation feels dangerous. If you are seen as strong, vulnerability feels unprofessional. If you are seen as agreeable, disagreement feels disruptive. So you maintain coherence, not necessarily because it is false, but because it is expected. Social media intensifies this dynamic. Every post becomes a small declaration of identity. Every reaction becomes reinforcement. Approval strengthens expression. Silence weakens it. You begin to present what works. Confidence performs well. Certainty performs well. Clarity performs well. But uncertainty, confusion, contradiction, these rarely do. The problem is not presentation. The problem is when presentation replaces evolution. When you feel yourself changing internally, softening a belief, questioning a stance, exploring nuance, but hesitate to show it because it disrupts the established image. Changing publicly can feel like losing authority. Admitting growth can feel like admitting inconsistency. So, instead of evolving openly, you defend previous versions of yourself, not always consciously, but reflexively. The more visible you are, the more pressure you feel to remain coherent with who you have been. And coherence becomes currency. But identity is not meant to be static. Life will challenge your self-image regardless of how carefully you maintain it. Failure, loss, aging, mistakes, they expose limits. They reveal contradictions. When that happens, you face a choice: tighten the defense or widen the identity. The world may reward consistency, but growth requires flexibility, and flexibility demands that you release the need to protect every earlier version of yourself. The real question is no longer whether the world reinforces your role. It does. The question is whether you are willing to outgrow it, even if that means disappointing the image you once worked hard to build. There is a subtle moment when everything begins to change. It doesn't look dramatic. There is no public announcement, no radical reinvention. It begins in a pause. Someone challenges you, and the familiar impulse rises. The tightening, the need to clarify, the urge to protect your position. But this time, you notice it. Instead of reacting immediately, you observe the reaction. And in that space, something becomes clear. What feels threatened is not your survival, it is your image. That realization is powerful, because once you see that you are defending a structure, you can question whether it still needs protection. Letting the image crack does not mean abandoning your strengths. It means separating your worth from your role. If you have always been the competent one, it might mean admitting calmly, "I may have missed something." If you have always been the strong one, it might mean saying, "This affected me more than I expected." If you have always been the agreeable one, it might mean expressing disagreement without apology. Externally, these moments are small. Internally, they are restructuring. Because each time you choose honesty over preservation, you weaken the belief that your identity must remain fixed to remain valuable. At first, this feels unstable. If you are not tightly holding the role, who are you? Without the armor, you may feel exposed. But exposure is not collapse. It is integration. When you allow yourself to contain contradictions consciously, you become less fragile. Being wrong no longer threatens your intelligence. Needing support no longer threatens your strength. Expressing limits no longer threatens your goodness. Flexibility replaces rigidity,
And flexibility is strength without tension. There is also a relational shift. When you no longer need to protect a narrow identity, conversations become less defensive. You listen more fully. You respond instead of react. Disagreement no longer feels like attack. You are not trying to win, you are trying to understand. The internal rehearsal begins to fade. You no longer replay every interaction to check if the image survived. Because survival of the image is no longer your priority. Alignment is. And alignment simplifies you, not morally, structurally. Your outer behavior begins to match your inner experience more honestly. The split narrows. The tension reduces. You realize something essential. You do not lose yourself when the image cracks. You lose confinement. And once you experience that freedom, even briefly, constant defense starts to feel unnecessary. The question that remains is simple but demanding. If you no longer need to defend who you thought you had to be, who are you willing to become?
At some point, the role helped you. It gave you structure. It earned you approval. It protected you from rejection. For that, it deserves recognition. But protection is not the same as identity. The problem begins when the strategy becomes permanent, when the version of you that once ensured safety becomes the version you feel obligated to preserve. Defending who you're not is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. You must monitor reactions, avoid contradiction, reinforce coherence, protect the image. And yet, the image was never your entirety. It was a selection. When you stop defending it, something unexpected happens. You do not collapse, you expand. Being wrong does not erase your intelligence. Needing help does not erase your strength. Expressing anger does not erase your goodness. Changing your mind does not erase your integrity. You begin to see that your worth was never inside the role. It was inside your capacity to be aware. Awareness can observe strength and weakness without panic. It can hold contradiction without fragmentation. It can evolve without feeling fraudulent. When you identify more with awareness than with the image, defensiveness loses urgency. You still have opinions, boundaries, preferences, but they are no longer fused with your value. They are expressions, not definitions. And this changes how you move through the world. Criticism becomes information, not threat. Disagreement becomes dialogue, not danger. Mistakes become feedback, not collapse. You no longer need to protect every previous version of yourself. You allow revision. You allow growth. You allow contradiction. This is not weakness. It is psychological maturity. Because maturity is not having a fixed identity. It is having an identity flexible enough to evolve. So the next time you feel that tightening, the impulse to justify, to defend, to reinforce, pause. Ask yourself, am I protecting truth or protecting an image? That question alone can begin dissolving years of unconscious defense. You do not need to destroy the role. You only need to loosen your grip on it, because who you are is not a static character to maintain. It is a living process to embody, and a living process does not need armor. It needs honesty. When you stop defending who you're not, you don't lose yourself. You finally have space to become.